This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you!
Boring. 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 Boring.
You gotta work. Don't tell us what we're gonna feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're gonna feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. That's exactly what you're doing. You're in no position to dictate what we're gonna feel.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Hello on the second day of 2026 there. Good morning to you if you're watching this live. Lembit Öpik here on a cold day in Britain. Mr. Frosty here is loving it. He's also loving the fact that the climate catastrophists have got it completely wrong again. I want to dedicate this last day of my indulgent monologue to you. I'm giving today off to my team as well. After that, they're all going to be back for business as usual next week. I want to devote this show to I told you so type thinking. I see even my collar's misbehaving there. And that's because I want to make quite clear the difference between weather and climate. Weather is what happens every day. Climate is what happens in the long term. But the I told you so comes from some preposterous claims, which I've mentioned before, but I will keep mentioning because they totally undermine the climate catastrophists who mix up weather and climate. If they're willing to do that, then let's explore their views. So in this brief 2nd of January, if you're watching it live, episode of Lembit Öpik Live, I want to make quite clear that I continue to believe the climate catastrophists have ruined their own credibility on the simple basis that they wanted you to think there was a crisis where there is none at all. This is the phrase I've used many, many times before. David Viner of University of East Anglia's disgraced climatic research unit advised, within a few years, winter snowfall will become a very rare and exciting event. Children just aren't going to know what snow is. And Britain's Meteorological Office said December was almost certain to become the coldest since, and on it goes. This is from over a decade ago. Who is David Viner? Well, he's some doctor in some academic sense who worked at the University of East Anglia. And according to this report, at the disgraced climatic research unit, well, that relates to some very, very bad practice, which looked very unscientific and looked very political when they were trying to cover certain information up and exaggerate other information to prove there was a climate emergency. That's for another time. It's quite a complicated story. But fundamentally, here's the point. Dr. David Viner, in the year 2000, 26 years ago, said, and I quote, "Children just aren't going to know what snow is." Lo and behold, a lot of Britain wakes up to a blanketing of snow. I checked with my children this morning. They know what snow is. They pointed at it on the ground. They said, it's cold out there. And that's snow. So David Viner, at least as far as the Öpik household is concerned, was completely wrong. Why do I keep mentioning this? It's because David Viner was making the classic mistake of mixing up weather and climate. And if he's going to start saying things like children just aren't going to know what snow is, let's apply a scientific principle. My father was a nuclear physicist, by the way, so I grew up with science. And one of the fundamental principles in science is predictable claims. In other words, you make a prediction and you see if it comes true. So the test is whether the claim can be proven to have been right or not. It's really quite a simple idea. I could simply say, if I throw a stone in the water, there'll be a splash. If there isn't a splash, then my theory was wrong. Well, Dr. David Viner's theory is that children, 26 years ago, children just aren't going to know what snow is. Well, we've had 26 years now to see if that's true or not. And it's obviously false. Millions of children today will be throwing snowballs at each other or watching the snow melt, perhaps in some places. but they'll all know what snow is. So fundamentally, what we see here is David Viner summarizing the whole problem with the climate catastrophists. They use weather events like the absence of snow to try and prove some great climatic change. And I continue to argue, maybe you have a different view, you're entitled to have a different view if you want to. I continue to argue that the whole problem is that these climate catastrophists are talking unscientific nonsense. And they do the classic thing, which gets clickbait working. They say things which are meant to frighten you into believing something. And then, well, frankly, it's just not true. Now, let's have a look at some other aspects of what's been going on. And my examples are weather related. But my argument here is that all over the world, we're seeing frequent examples of record cold, not warm, but record cold. Now, if you were to watch the mainstream media, and I do watch it so that you don't have to, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Britain is sweltering, that the world is melting. The very foolish man who works in United Nations, Antonio Gutierrez, uses phrases like global boiling, global melting, all this unscientific twaddle, basically. Well, I want to put a different case. I want to suggest that if you look at the weather, there's really nothing to be concerned about. I want to go further than that. I want to say the reason we keep being told that 2025 was a record warm year and so on is because if we weren't told, you wouldn't notice, because the climate isn't substantially warmer. It has got a bit warmer, I think, mainly from natural reasons, almost entirely for natural reasons, but it's not exactly a crisis. Now, here's an interesting story. Historic snowstorm blankets Syracuse just in time for the new year. Now, this story's only a couple of days old. Syracuse, New York, that's a state, by the way, not just a city, it's a state, has received nearly twice its usual monthly amount of snow in December. Now, okay, David Vine, I want to understand then what you will ascribe this to. Everyone in Syracuse knows what snow is. It's in fact quite a hassle. It's disrupting life there. Or maybe you only meant it for Britain. Well, in which case you're beginning to limit yourself anyway. I argue that foolish people like the University of East Anglia's Dr. David Viner were chancing their arm a quarter of a century ago, saying things they hoped we would forget. Well, the people in Syracuse haven't forgotten about snow, and it's a very heavy situation. There's a lot of snow going on there, and that makes it once again difficult for those who endlessly use the arguments of snow and everything that goes with it to proceed with that. Here's a video clip about the snow in New York State, and once again, you're not going to be able to measure the depth of it there, but there's no doubt there's a blanketing of snow. If you were to believe the catastrophists, you'd assume that snow is a thing of the past. Well, in actual fact, in New York State, places like this have recorded the second highest snowfall since 1902. That's when records began. And it's pretty much a bit of an emergency there now. They've got all of this going on, which is perfectly enjoyable to look at, but doesn't really accord with the idea that we're all sweltering in horrendous melting heat. I have to say I quite like snow, even though it can be disruptive. And my children love it. They get really excited. No doubt today there'll be a certain amount of snowball fighting in fields with my two little ones. Now, is it all just restricted to America? No, it isn't. In Turkey, you may not think of Turkey as a place which gets snow, but they can get pretty cold there. Snowfall grips Turkey on New Year's Day. Now, this is this year, or this recent New Year's Day, and there's been some very heavy snowfall. One migrant apparently died in the cold as well. It probably happens more than we realize. So there's no problem in terms of finding places in where though it's been pretty heavy as well. And I could go on and make various examples like this. But let's get back to the other side. We've got Ed Miliband telling us that we have to declare a climate change emergency. Well, okay then. Explain to me, if you understand, Mr. Miliband, the difference between weather and climate. Explain to me how the minuscule amounts of carbon dioxide emitted by human beings could even be doing any of this. And so on the one side, we've got the weather doing its thing with loads of millions and millions of people, hundreds of millions of people all over the world experiencing quite heavy snow at this time. And then we've got Miliband living in his little heated ivory tower, overheating about a climate emergency. And what seems to be happening here is a perfect storm of the catastrophes, people like him, and the actual reality on the ground, and literally on the ground, with the blanketing of snow. Now, why do I go on about this so much? It's because the other narrative you're hearing at the moment is that people are in trouble financially, that Britain's not doing very well. And one of the key reasons is energy costs. Why is energy so expensive in Britain? It's because we choose to have the most expensive energy we could possibly have. That's renewables. Be under no illusion on this. When people like Ed Miliband say, oh, well, the answer is literally solar panels and wind turbines. Okay, in that case, the answer is not cheap, because solar panels are ridiculously expensive. I've had an ongoing dispute. I got solar panels. What a waste of money. An ongoing dispute with the people who installed them. Total waste of money as far as I can see. And as for wind turbines, what happens when the wind doesn't blow? Where's the wind come? Where's the electricity coming from then? You have to have something called spinning reserve. You have to have something that makes up the missing power from the turbines. There's another irony. When it's too windy, they can't run the turbines either. So they're desperately unreliable. Britain is quite windy. It's not very sunny. And so the solar panels don't even make sense at a northern latitude like ours, except in some very limited applications. Put all that together, and we've messed up our own energy costs, all because of people like Ed Miliband who'll tell you there's a climate emergency. And then they point to the weather to try to justify it. Now, if Miliband was here, and as I say, I've let my presenters off today and also most of the team, but if Miliband was here, he probably wouldn't want to come on, but he's welcome to if he wants to. You might say, oh, well, you're not looking at the long term. So let's have a look at the long term in that case. Let's see what's going on. This doesn't get reported very much because it gets complicated. So on the one side, you've got people saying stuff like this. It looks more likely with each day we burn fossil fuels, polar scientists on Antarctic tipping points. You get the catastrophists saying, oh, yeah, there's going to be a tipping point and then the Antarctic is going to melt. And you go, oh, well, that sounds pretty bad. And then sea level's going to rise and London's going to be underwater. And you get all this, this terrible fear mongering. But then you look at other statistics. Antarctic ice loss accelerated in 2010 to 2020, then abruptly gained mass. This is a scientific paper. I won't go through the details. Mass changes over the Antarctic ice sheet revealed by satellite gravimetry, highlighting instabilities in key East Antarctic glacier basins and the entire ice sheet. So on the one side, they're saying there's instability. On the other side, they have to admit there's been a sudden leap in the amount of ice in the Antarctic. Now, you have to dig pretty deep to get this, because it seems to me algorithms try to prevent the kind of messaging I'm giving you here on unprecedented TV from getting much coverage. But there is no doubt that there was a mysterious increase in Antarctic ice. You go into the internet, you'll find all these articles about how Antarctic ice and Arctic ice is all declining. But the story isn't anything like as simple as that. And as a result, you end up with all of this kind of confusion. As a weather map now, it's a recent weather map showing that it's going to be really cold in the UK. And people go, well, how can all this be consistent? My friends, it isn't. And it's not consistent because you've been sold a pup. You've been told lies, in my opinion, for years and years and years by the very same kind of catastrophists who told us in the 1970s, I remember it well, that we were heading into an ice age. So I'm throwing various examples of contradiction here at you. Is it possible to make it simpler? Not easily, but let me try anyway. At the University of East Anglia, where Dr. David Viner worked, this is the University of East Anglia, by the way, under snow. See the irony? They have the Climatic Research Unit. And it seems that that unit, rather than seeking scientific truth, was seeking to prove the climate emergency. Now, this is a much documented scandal. And it's why some people say the climatic research unit is disgraced there. I don't tend to use kind of language like that myself. But the reality is, it looked like the climatic research unit was in league with others in America to try to promote the argument that science was settled, that there's a climate emergency. And yet, as hopefully you've seen, at the very least, the science is not settled. At the very worst, it's just plain untrue. So my feeling here is quite simple. When you got people like David Viner saying things like this, children just aren't going to know what snow is, they reveal a very sad reality about the climate catastrophes. What they're trying to do is politicize science and silence those who object to that politicization. People like Dr. David Viner with phrases like, within a few years, winter snowfall will become a very rare and exciting event. They're actually trying to direct you, what's it called in magic? Misdirect you into thinking that we're all going to fry. That's why the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, paid for by largely taxpayers' money, is devoted to telling you that 2025 was record warm year, even if you didn't feel it yourself. That's why you won't get this kind of analysis on the mainstream media, because it contradicts the narrative they've been shoving down your throat for decades. That's the reason why they say the science is settled, because they know that when people like me go onto their programs, it couldn't be less settled. It couldn't be more unsettled, because the questions I ask, such as explain to me how carbon dioxide produced by humans can make a measurable difference to climate. When I ask questions like that, they don't have answers for it. They'll just point to weather events and tell you absolute nonsense, which isn't even based on reality. And one example of this, which I've mentioned before, and I'll mention again, is when Fiona Bruce, the person who presents Question Time on the BBC, claimed that 1/3 of carbon dioxide emissions were human generated. That's utter drivel, utter nonsense. It's about 4%. That's about 1/25th, not 1/3, 1/25th of annual carbon dioxide emissions are actually made by human beings. It might even be less than that, in fact. And instead of broadcasting what's meant to be an as-live program, namely Question Time, they cut it out. They edited out her blunder, because I guess they realized what a big blunder it was. Isn't that a shame that instead of giving you the truth about how foolish the misunderstanding of BBC presenters is of the whole issue, they just edited out? If one of the panelists had done that in Question Time, I have no doubt they'd have left it in. But no, the BBC had to protect itself, its own credibility, even though now you know this, it massively damages the credibility of the BBC on this issue. So putting all this together, what am I saying? What I'm saying to you is there is no climate emergency. There's weather and there's climate. Climate changes over time. And almost entirely that change is caused by natural phenomena. I'll come back to that at the end. Weather changes day to day. So at time of broadcasting, there's a beautiful blanket of snow all over the fields where and there's towns and everything else in eastern England. And the further north you go, the more snow there is, roughly speaking. It's quite likely, I haven't checked, it's quite likely the snow at the University of East Anglia, where David Viner made his foolish commentary from. At least he was working there when he said it. And in the north of England, you've got beautiful, beautiful landscape, in my view, and amber weather warnings as well. This, I think, is very recent. We thank the producers of this. This is actually archive footage. And as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to worry about when it comes to warming. But, and returning to the last point, I am concerned that the obsession with global warming ignores the reality. Probably in the next 10 to 30 years, it's going to get substantially cooler. Now, I might be wrong. I'm not going to make the same mistake that the catastrophists make who tell you about warming. There is quite a lot of reason to believe that we've reached the peak, the warming peak, natural oscillation, And it's been getting warmer since the last minimum period, which ended about 150 years ago, maybe 200 years ago, something like that. And then it's going to get colder. And that's not good news, because cold kills far more people than heat. And cold needs energy. But if we go down this ludicrous path, promoted by sadly, not just the Labour Party, but also by the Conservatives up to a point, they're actually responsible for kicking off this net zero nonsense, even though they're backing off it now, then people like Miliband will have wrecked our economic viability by having really bad forms of energy like solar panels and wind turbines, and that makes us uneconomic. That has two effects. It makes our power very, very expensive, and worse still, it makes our power variable, unless, of course, we also have all these different kinds of systems which kick in when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. My friends, much as I can poke fun at Dr. David Viner for his ridiculous claim that our children aren't going to know what snow is, a demonstrably false statement, I am very concerned that the biggest danger we face now is idiotic policies coming from ignorant politicians who don't understand even the basics of climate reality. And this can make the United Kingdom economically unviable, and it can make the cost of energy, which is at the heart of every first world nation's financial budget, not viable either. So what we end up with is sky-high energy bills, people potentially freezing to death, if I'm right about things getting colder, and manufacturing drifting off to sensible countries like China, India, potentially Russia, that have no intention of abandoning hydrocarbon fuels like coal, gas, oil just yet. If you look at 1,000 years hence, I've little doubt we'll have found really good ways of powering our society, assuming we haven't incinerated ourselves in some unforgivable act of neglect. And so fossil fuels have their time, or hydrocarbon fuels to be precise, they'll have their time, and that time could pass. But for now, we still live in an age where coal, gas, and oil power your standard of living, where those kinds of fuels power the aspiration of billions of people to achieve the same standard of living that has been achieved by those who have embraced coal, gas, and oil. Who are we to tell those who follow us in those aspirations in third and second world countries they're not allowed to do it on the basis of a fake proposition that the minuscule quantity of carbon dioxide emitted each year by human beings is wagging the dog of climate? It just isn't. 3 final facts for you. First of all, the entire production of carbon dioxide, all of it, in the history of our species, the human race, Homo sapiens, it seems to be less than nature kicks out every 3 years. That's right, 36 months. Nature puts out more carbon dioxide in 36 months than the human race has done in 100,000 years. Second point, back to that 4%. Of the 800,000 million tons of carbon dioxide emitted every year, human beings emit about 40 billion of that. Tiny proportion, maybe less, maybe even less than that. Those figures are hard to figure, but it's something like that. So if we stopped producing carbon dioxide completely, then the emissions would be 96% plus of what they are now. They would be almost the same. Just lose 4%, that's all. And if the climate is so vulnerable, then why hasn't it gone crazy before when carbon dioxide was far higher for natural reasons? And the third and the final statistic is this. The reason that our electricity bills are so high, our home power bills are so high, is because of the stupidity of government policy. Now, you might argue that's not actually a statistic, but as far as I'm concerned, the numbers on your bills are the direct consequence of the economic mismanagement of our energy system on the basis of a false premise. A few comments from you here. Yes, Fiona Bruce is reading a script, isn't she? From DIFA 2. Colin says Fiona Bruce should stick to the Antiques Road show. Christopher Jennings says Viner was working hand in hand with the IPCC. Both were cooking the books as exposed through emails. Now, Christopher Jennings, you're absolutely right. That's interesting that you know that pretty well. And that's what I was alluding to. There are books about basically ClimateGate, as it was called, a scandal where the Climatic Research Unit in the University of East Anglia was caught red-handed in trying to prove, by reverse engineering information, prove claims about climate emergency, which don't seem to be true. And Viner, I've tried to find out what he's doing now. It's very difficult to find out, but I can be absolutely sure he's nowhere near the University of East Anglia. But sadly, Dr. Viner, your legacy lives on. You said the preposterous thing about snow, and that will haunt you for the rest of your days. And Colin says water is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. That's right. And H2O, interestingly enough, is, Colin also says, I think it's planned limit. I think you're right. I'm sure you're right. World Economic Forum loves this way of control. United Nations loves it as well, though they've completely undermined their own credibility scientifically, in my view. But it is all planned. And maybe I'll make a comment about that as well. But the most important greenhouse gas on Earth is actually H2O, is water vapor. At the equator, it's 90 times more important as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. The only place in the whole world where carbon dioxide has a bigger effect on greenhouse as a greenhouse gas than water vapor is actually at the South Pole, where it's desperately cold and the air is very, very dry, very little moisture in it. But on the rest of the planet, carbon dioxide is knocked out of the park by H2O, by water vapor. But you don't hear the catastrophists saying, oh, we've got to reduce water vapor in the atmosphere, because they probably realize that's impossible. Clouds are water vapor. We need water vapor. We need rain, and so forth, and everything that goes with it. So my conclusion in all of this is that we have people who have got no scientific interest at all. Diva says, a jolly good lamb chop. I'm off to play in the mild frost then. Thanks very much. I hope it's cold for you, because cold is good. Now, cold, incidentally, when you have a cold winter, it reduces disease in the summer because it kills microbes which kind of hang around if it doesn't get very cold. I learned that when I was an MP from farmers, interestingly enough. So my view is there is no climate crisis. The snow that we have got, it has probably been diminishing, but it will increase again due to natural cycles. And the last thing we need to worry about is human emissions of carbon dioxide. If anything, we should be increasing them, because the more carbon dioxide there is, the greener the world gets, because it's the gas of life, as Jeremy Corbyn's brother says. It's a gas of life because it's an airborne fertilizer. So go out there, enjoy the snow with your kids, or just throw snowballs at adults and hope you don't get arrested. But the last thing you need to worry about when you turn the key on your petrol engine car is what's coming out the exhaust. Next week, we'll be having the guests again. I've been giving them time off this week because we're caring employers. I want them all to be out there rolling around in the snow, whatever weird things people do to prove how tough they are. I am taking the tough line that Dr. David Viner and the Climatic Research Unit of the University of East Anglia is embarrassed every time it snows, because our children do know what snow is, and they will do for the indefinite future. Have a good Friday if you're watching this live. If you're watching this in the archive, you'll find out if I was right or wrong. Next week, we're back to the guests. I'm Lembit Öpik. That was Lembit Öpik Live on Unprecedented TV. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a good and cold day. I'm off to play with Mr. Frost.
Immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The return of the sausages.